Good morning. Mrs. Montgomery here with today's story. We had a lot of fun this morning over here. Ella and Charlie and I did a live Zoom art class with Mrs. Bruno. I saw some of you were there. If you didn't get a chance to log on to her art lesson this morning, I hope you can do it next week because it was really fun. It was great to see Mrs. Bruno, and we made some really nice Easter eggs, and that was a lot of fun. Today I'm going to read The Tale of Peter Rabbit, written and illustrated by Beatrix Potter. This book was first published a long time ago in 1902. It was a long time ago. Beatrix was really a pioneer for women writers. She was one of the first women to actually have her work published and printed, and she got paid for her work, which was unusual for women writers in the early 1900s. Prior to her, getting her work published, only men could have their writing printed and published. So she really paved the way. She was one of the first women to have her work published and to be paid for her work. These books were wildly popular with children when they were first printed, and she became a very, very successful author. She did all of her own illustrations based on animals that she observed in nature, and so they're very realistic and really sweet. She liked her books to be small so that they could fit in the palm of a child's hand. And I'm just interested to know how many of you have read her books. I know you guys have probably seen the Peter Rabbit movie, and movies. I think there are two. And there's a Peter Rabbit TV show starring characters based on Beatrix Potter's books. And I know that there are other books, Peter Rabbit books, and Jemima Puddle Duck and her other character books, that are not written by her but based on her work. But I'm just interested to know if you guys have read any of these Beatrix Potter books. And here, look at the cute illustrations. There's Squirrel Nutkin. So here is the original Peter Rabbit. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden." "Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor." Ugh. "Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. And currants are sweet little berries. They're sort of like raisins. They remind me of raisins. Usually have dried currants. We don't really have fresh currants around here. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden. And squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. Parsley can settle your stomach. But round the corner of a cucumber frame, who should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Uh-oh. Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving his rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages. There it is right there. This little tiny shoe. And the other shoe amongst the potatoes. And here's the other shoe. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so I think that he might have got away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears. But his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. So they begged him to put in more energy and get up. They're saying, "Come on, get up, you can do it." Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out of in time, leaving his jacket behind him. So he scooted out, but left his jacket. And rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. So now he's going to be wet. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently Peter sneezed. "Kerchoo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time. And tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. So now he's wet from the watering can, and he's scared, and he is lost. He doesn't know which way to get to the gate. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. There's the tiny little mouse. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still. Every now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. That's another of her stories, is Benjamin Bunny. He went back toward the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scratch, 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 scratch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes. A hoe is a gardening tool, a metal gardening tool used to turn the soil. But presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow, and he peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. He's in the garden using the hoe, and here, way in the back, is the gate where Peter's trying to get. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go, along a straight walk behind some black currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. So Mr. McGregor came running again, but he got out just in time. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. So there's Peter's little coat and his shoes made into a scarecrow. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him until he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. A fortnight is 2 weeks, so 14 days. So in 14 days, he had lost 2 jackets and 2 pairs of shoes. So his mom's probably not too happy about that, right? And that's Peter in the back laying down miserable. I'm sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter, 1 tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime. And chamomile is an herbal tea, and it can settle your tummy if you have an upset tummy. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper, because they were good little bunnies, right? The end. So I hope you guys really liked this story. I'm interested, like I said earlier, to hear if you guys have heard the original Peter Rabbit written by Beatrix Potter before, or if this is your first time hearing it, hearing this original version. She has a lot of other really great books. I have a whole collection of them. Some other characters are Squirrel Nutkin, Jemima Puddle Duck, Benjamin Bunny, and all of her books have a moral to them, a moral to the story, a lesson to be learned. So, for example, Peter sneaking off and not listening to his mom, right, and running off to the garden, what happened? He ate too much, he got sick, he was terrified, he lost his jacket, he lost his shoes, and he almost lost his life, right? He did not listen at all. So that was the lesson, I think, for Peter, was to listen to his mother and not to go back to Mr. McGregor's garden. All of the other books have the characters learn a lesson too. Some of them are a little bit gruesome, or kind of like a serious lesson. But they're great books. I love them so much, and I hope you enjoyed this too. And I really want to wish you a happy Easter. I hope you and your family enjoy Easter, and I hope that you have a nice, peaceful Good Friday. And I'll be praying for all of you and praying for everybody to get well, and that we can all see each other in person really soon. Okay, happy Easter. Look forward to seeing you soon.